Welcome everyone to day one of community engagement of championing the CALL Digital Dexterity Framework Virtual Festival. Now, we'll all be referring to the framework, and that first link in the chat box is the link to the framework if you wanted to refer to it, refresh your memory, or have a look at it for the first time. I'm Nika Sekrakis, and I'm the Digital Dexterity Champion for Australian Catholic University. So I'm coming from Brisbane today, and with me is my fellow champion, Ruth Cameron from the University of Newcastle. She's my co-lead for the day. You'll be hearing from her later. We've been part of a working group planning, organizing, and now we'll be facilitating this virtual festival for digital dexterity. Thank you again for joining us for this session. So the first thing I'd like to ask is to conserve bandwidth. If you'll all mute yourselves and turn off your cameras if you're not speaking, if you haven't already. Thank you. On behalf of the organizing working group, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands across Australia and New Zealand where we meet today. I'm on the Turrbal and Yagara land here in Banyo. If you know the land you're on, feel free to put it in the chat box. We acknowledge and celebrate the inherent strengths of Aboriginal, Torres Strait Islander, and other First Nations peoples and communities, and recognize their continuing connection to land, waters, sky, and culture. We pay our respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. Today we have our keynote address from Fiona Salisbury. She's the Executive Director and University Librarian of La Trobe University. She'll be setting the scene for our framework, the Champions Group, and the community of practice. Next, we have our lightning talks from members of various working groups. So from the Digidex Resource Sharing Working Group, we have Karen Miller, Coordinator, Learning Success from Curtin University. She'll sum up the copyright guidelines document. Kat Kane, Manager, Digital Library Programs from Deakin, will take us through the endorsement for the CC by SA license. And Kelly George, Academic and Research Librarian from Charles Darwin University, will share setting up the OER Commons. Moving on from the Digidex Governance Working Group, we have Emily Pyers, Library Website and Systems Officer, Victoria University. She'll tell us about how to organize a champions group and community of practice. And the last lightning talk is from Anna Shah Hosseini, Information Services Librarian, University of Technology, Sydney, from the Digidex Engagement Working Group, and she'll tell us about setting up the blog. After the lightning talks, there'll be time for a 5-minute break before Beck Muir, Manager at Libraries West, and Amika Anale, Library Officer, both from Victoria University, take us through championing the power and paradox of online learning in a remote working environment. If you have any questions, we will have time at the end of the talks for Q&A. If you have a question, pop it in the chat box. We'll be monitoring that throughout this session as well. And just before we get started with you, Fiona, I would like to thank the Digital Dexterity Champions Network, the Events Organizing Working Group, and in particular, Sarah Davidson, who's helped make this event possible. Speaking of Sarah, if you have any technical issues throughout the session, please send her a private chat message to Sarah Davidson at Cavall, and she'll be able to help you do that. So now let us get into the session. Thanks, Fiona. I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you so much. And I'm very, very pleased to be here. And I'm just listening to that long list of fantastic lightning talks. just reminded me why the Digital Dexterity Champions is such a strong, wonderful group. But what I'm going to do today is just sort of talk about a bit about the background of how they got to that wonderful place. So I'll share my screen. So what I'm doing today is going to set the scene. And I'd also like to first, though, start this session by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet today and pay respects to elders past, present and emerging. And today I'm usually at home. I'm in the library today and at the Bundoora campus, and I'm on Wurundjeri land. So my role this afternoon is to set the scene and provide the background for the Digital Dexterity Framework, Champions Group and Community of Practice. These three things were a result of the CALL Digital Dexterity Program, and I was very fortunate to be part of the program as a project leader from 2017 to 2019. As I'm sure most of you know, CALL is the peak leadership organisation for university libraries in Australia, with 39 Australian member institutions and 8 members of the Council of New Zealand University Librarians. CALL members are committed to a shared purpose, which is to transform how people experience knowledge, how it can be discovered, used and shared. CALL's vision is that society is transformed through the power of research, teaching and learning. In 2017, CALL established 2 strategic priorities for the period 2017 to 2019, and these came out of an intensive facilitated planning session capturing the insights and priorities of CALL members over a 2-day period. The priorities which emerged for CALL at the time were fair, affordable and open access to knowledge and digital dexterity, new skills for learning and research excellence. These 2 programs marked a change of approach for CALL. It was the first time that we'd used a programmatic approach, where we identified broad strategies and used a series of projects led by a program director sitting on the CALL board to drive those strategies forward. The program director for the CALL Digital Dexterity Program was Carmel O'Sullivan, who's the University Librarian at USQ. I don't think it's surprising that digital dexterity emerged as a priority for CALL at the meeting in 2017. We're all part of the digital landscape in our professional and personal lives. We all have, to different extents and in different contexts, navigated digital challenges, and we've all been adaptable and learned new skills to live, learn and work in the digital world. In this environment, we need digital capability, and this means different things to different people depending on their context and need. In libraries, the terms digital dexterity, digital fluency and digital literacy are often used interchangeably, and it can be very confusing. And so the CALL program intentionally adopted the term digital dexterity, as it describes the ability to adapt and change, to create and to work with digital technologies as the world around us changes. We drew inspiration from the Gartner definition, which describes digitally dexterous organisations as having the ability and desire to exploit existing and emerging technologies for better business outcomes. And for us, this applies to students, graduates and staff of our institutions, as well as the institutions themselves. And it applies to better social and educational research outcomes as well. The CALL Digital Dexterity Program had 2 key objectives, and they were to promote awareness of the importance of digital dexterity to accomplishing university missions, and to ensure that Australian graduates are given opportunities to develop the digital skills that will enable them to thrive in a global work context and become effective global citizens. To realise these objectives, the Digital Dexterity Program consisted of 3 project teams: Digital Dexterity Framework Team, Digital Dexterity Capability Team, and the Digital Dexterity Advocacy Team. To bring the program objectives to life in 2018, the 3 teams worked on 2 key outcomes: a national position on digital dexterity and a sustainable model for building library staff digital capability. This focus on staff capability recognises that libraries can't support the development of student and researcher capability if library staff themselves aren't digitally dexterous. So our key challenge, because we had 3 teams, was coordinating multiple projects across 14 institutions and 2 countries. And as I mentioned, this was the first time that CORE undertook a programmatic approach to driving strategy. And in doing this, we learned a number of lessons. So firstly, we learned that having a grassroots approach where the work is being done by a large group of staff across institutions is at times very messy, but the benefits around increased buy-in and representation outweigh any disadvantages. Secondly, we found that once the projects began, even though we had clear project initiation documents, there were lots of shifts and changes. And for our 3 projects, only the framework team really delivered to its brief. The other 2 groups looked critically at the brief and changed directions to better respond to call strategy and the program objectives. And the important thing was that this way of working was totally supported. So, for example, the capability building team decided not to develop specific digital dexterity resources, as was our brief, but instead to build and establish a community of practice and work with the advocacy team to develop appropriate resources that would support the implementation of that community of practice. Thirdly, our 3 project teams tended to work almost as one, and this was incredibly beneficial. In a multi-layered program, it was often difficult to disentangle pieces of work and label them as belonging to one project team over another, and team members generously crossed teams as needed to get the work done. And lastly, we all agreed on reflection that the programmatic approach meant we were able to deliver very tangible outcomes in a relatively short space of time. The projects were a success. When we look back, we can see how successful they were, and that's really what I want to emphasise today. And the objectives that were delivered included a position statement on digital dexterity outlining principles and goals and a digital dexterity framework. The second outcome was a digital dexterity community of practice and a champions network, which includes a champion within each member university library. An advocacy toolkit for use by members of the community of practice that provides a structured way to approach advocating for engaging with conversations about digital dexterity at an institution. The digital dexterity policy position and framework documents define digital dexterity and provide a starting point for stakeholder engagement. It's critical that CORE has a succinct and accessible message around the future of work and education in a digital age, and the CORE position statement and digital dexterity framework fit that brief. I'm sure many of you will be familiar with the framework. It includes 6 digital dexterity elements and related attributes, knowledge and capabilities. Some libraries have used this document as it is, some have adapted it for their institutional context, and some already had an existing institutional framework, so they haven't used it at all. But even those who haven't needed the framework have given feedback that a national CORE framework was worth doing in that it raised awareness, solidified CORE's position and connected academic libraries in a shared conversation about digital dexterity that they could then carry into conversations at their institution. I'd be very interested to hear whether you've used the framework, not used it or adapted it, and maybe we can pick up the comments about that at the end of this session. The second major outcome that I want to spend a bit of time talking about is the Champions Group and the community of practice to build staff capability and skills. And from my perspective, this is really a dream come true in so many ways, because while the program and projects had a defined timeline, the community of practice was intended to continue, and that's exactly what it's done. And it's done it in ways that are even better than we imagined when we were in that project group. The community of practice is grassroots capability development at its best. It's developed into a community that is engaged in building digital capability by enabling peer-to-peer sharing of ideas and resources. Those of you who've been involved will be familiar with how it works. CALL and CONSL members nominate a digital dexterity champion to join a more focused group within the community of practice. This DigiDex Champions Network, and it's been called a network, it's been called a group, and it's been called a league, promotes the community of practice in their own institution, and they also work together to organise events and activities for all members of the community of practice. Communities of practice develop organically, but they also need support to grow, and this community of practice has support on quite a number of levels. Firstly, I think it's critical that the champions are nominated by their university librarian, and this was a deliberate thing when we were setting up the champions group. Strategically, it's really important because it means the champion has institutional support and their role as a champion has the endorsement of their university librarian, not just to participate in the group, but to take a leadership role in relation to digital dexterity in their institution and also part of CALL. The community of practice also has industry support because it's a partnership between CALL and CAVAL. The CAVAL is a consortium of 10 Australian libraries, as you might know, and it provides a range of professional services for member libraries, including professional development. And since we brought the champions together with our CAVAL colleagues for their first meeting in Perth in the middle of 2019, they've gone from strength to strength. And as the CALL program has come to an end, CAVAL has continued to support and facilitate the champions group so the champions can continue to do what they do best. And most importantly, the other level of support is the champions support each other to keep the community of practice going. They're a very inclusive group and champions have come in and out over the last 18 months. And my observation is that every new champion is very warmly welcomed into the group and valued for what they have to share and contribute. The champions group, like the broader community of practice, has all the characteristics documented in the academic literature that are essential for a community of practice. It's a group of people who share a passion for digital dexterity and who learn and improve their practice by getting together and communicating, connecting regularly around digital literacy. So what do? They collaborate, they communicate and connect with each other, they share resources and ideas, they plan digital DigiDex events, and they have fun. And I think that's the most important thing. They have heaps of fun, just like we had heaps of fun in the original project teams. And also, there's no right or wrong way to be a champion. So it's a very open, fluid and flexible group, generous group. So champions are at the core of the community of practice. They meet monthly. And I think after 18 months, they've really developed a really strong, positive identity and are a very energetic collective of library staff. Most importantly, they're self-governing and self-organising. Since they started, they have collectively nurtured the wider community of practice by organising annual satellite events at conferences like this one and local events within their own communities and libraries. They've built on the digital dexterity framework by developing a framework for library professionals. And most recently, they've been working on a structure to share open resources. And I think this, to me, this is sort of like the icing on the cake of the dream. And you're going to hear more about that this afternoon as well. So the group is doing everything the project team imagined it would do and much more. So I think the community of practice, like all communities of practice, it will last for as long as it's needed. at the moment, it's got amazing momentum, and it doesn't look like it's going to be running out of steam anytime soon. And I think the disruption of 2020 only reinforced the importance of digital dexterity and how change in work and education practices can happen quickly and unexpectedly. And we all experienced that last year. And we found out how rapid change can be. And even though we might like to predict trends and types of technologies that will impact us in the future, we don't know exactly how they're going to impact our lives and work, which is really what we found out last year. What we do know, though, is the digital economy will demand new ideas, new information and business models. And 2020 was really a year for digital learning, and it was also a time of, in many of our universities, restricted budgets and diminished professional development budgets in particular. And I think the Champions Group and the community of practice played an invaluable role in providing some continuity for connecting and learning in a really disrupted environment. So CALL took a different approach to achieving its strategic goals by using a programmatic structure back in 2017. And there are so many benefits to this approach. It's meant key programs and objectives were realised in tangible ways for library staff, with many library staff being empowered to start conversations about digital dexterity in their institutions that had flow-on benefits for students and academics. In 2021, in addition to continuing the work of the Fair, Affordable and Open Access to Knowledge program, there are 3 more strategic priorities that were identified in 2020, and related projects and teams will be developed in the coming months. We want to, in these programs, we want to continue to involve staff from across all academic libraries so they can share their knowledge and skills and in turn improve expertise and practice in their own library and institution. From my own experience being involved in the Digital Dexterity program and leading the Capability project, it was a great way to get involved with CALL, and it certainly motivated me to want to keep contributing in this way through the Enabling a Modern Curriculum program this year. There's nothing more inspiring than working with committed, passionate and enthusiastic colleagues from other institutions. It just opens up your world and improves your own practice so much. You learn heaps, you realise, and I certainly realised what library staff are capable of when we work in collaboration within and across our institutions. My experience of being involved in the Digital Dexterity program has been extremely rewarding and positive, and I'm very grateful to have worked with so many amazing colleagues. And I'm very keen now to, after giving that background and setting the scene of how the framework came about and how the community of practice came about and the sort of intention underlying the community of practice and how the champions have, just taken that and run with it and really gone beyond it. I'm very keen to hear about how others are maybe using the framework and also their experience of the community of practice, because these are the sorts of things that we want to think about as we look to starting these new programs with CALL this year. So thank you. And yes, I'm very, very happy to have comments and learn about your experiences in the few minutes that we've got left.
Thanks so much for that, Fiona. That was so inspiring. It's a bit amazing that you know just how much fun we have in our champions meetings. It's like you've been sitting in the background listening to us. But you're right, it is a fun, generous, energetic group. And it just seems to have epitomised, you know, the value of working in libraries, and this is what library staff do. So it's lovely to know that we're a dream come true. So yes, if anyone does have comments or questions about Fiona's talk, please either unmute or put them into chat. No, we've got one comment from Emily saying that she feels validated, which is awesome.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think, you know, like I think it's one of the most amazing things that I've been involved in my career in academic libraries. And it's just, yeah, I just think long may it continue, really. And even if this community of practice runs its course, I think we should take what we've got out of this and put it to work in other projects and other activities that we're involved in, and keep those connections with each other is really important.
That's exactly right. The networking has been just incredible. So we had a question from, where are we? Kat Kane actually asked, can you see explicit links between Digidex work and the new modern curriculum project?
That's a really good question, Kat, and yes, I can. I think I was really absolutely thrilled to be, you know, become part of the core board to lead the Enabling a Modern Curriculum program, because I don't see that it will overlap with the Digital Dexterity program, but I can see how it will build on it. And some of the things that we've started talking about for that program are open educational resources, and also students as partners, and also student wellness. And I think those three themes, and I'm not sure yet, we're still working it out, I'm not sure yet whether all of those themes will become projects and will become part of the program. But each of those in many ways builds on the work that the Digital Dexterity program did, and that the Champions are facilitating at the moment in the community of practice. So yes, there could be some exciting links there.
All very exciting. We've had a comment from Sharon Bryant saying that 2020 has actually been a boon for digital dexterity. It's made us actually walk the walk in terms of digital first and not just talk the talk.
Yeah, I think that's so true. And I think, thank goodness, the community of practice and the Champions were there, you know, because it's easier to, you know, walk the walk, if you like, if you've got, if you're not walking it by yourself.
That's right.
I think that I mean, you know, lucky we did that, really. It's been great to have it, especially last year.
And Karen Miller concurs about the value of cross-institutional sharing, and she's found it valuable for her own professional development. And that was really where we were getting it from last year.
Mm-hmm. Yes, well, I know at La Trobe our professional development budget has been absolutely squeezed, and it's much smaller this year than it was in 2019 and 2020. So, you know, things like this are how we educate ourselves, learn, share. You know, it is so important.
Okay, that looks to be all the questions and comments we have for now.
Has anybody got a comment about using the framework? Because I'm just interested if you used it or adapted it.
We do have a poll that's going to come out later during the presentations today. So, and we've got questions in the poll about the framework, so we can feed those back to you.
Interested. Yeah. Yep.
I could jump in because I use the framework explicitly in our 23 Things program.
Yes.
I created a mapping, well, I did a mapping exercise where I mapped each of the 23 things, the topics, 23 topics against the framework, and identified, and I went in and pulled out the specific kind of attributes or whatever they were that we felt we were covering in the topic. So it was incredibly useful for that. But what I found really good was that it really ensured that when we selected the 23 topics, that they were represented across the whole 6 areas, and you could really kind of like see the spread, and where, you know, whether it was weighted one way or the other. So it was amazingly useful, and yeah, I'm really looking forward to, well, I can make that available as well for anyone to have a look at how we did that. Yeah, maybe I'll pop it up on OER Commons. Yeah, so it was really, really good.
That's really interesting, Karen. I mean, the reason I'm interested in that is because at La Trobe, we already had an institutional framework. So we didn't use the core framework. So I'm sort of a little bit less aware of how other people have used it and how useful it's been. So that's really good. But even, you know, sharing how you did that mapping, we could even, you know, other places that already had a framework could look at that as well, because it's always fascinating to see how people map stuff, and that can be transferred. So that'd be great. Thank you.
Yeah, sure.
We used it at Federation as well for an internal peer-to-peer learning and sharing program that we ran. It was a pilot project, which was really successful. We got a lot of good feedback from our staff about that. But it was, as Karen said, really useful to map things out to different areas and see at the end of the project sort of where we had gaps, and that we could move forward and do other training next year, but also, like, you know, where we were coming out quite strongly. It was great.
Excellent. That sounds great. I like the idea of identifying gaps.
I think it was also great to have a starting point. If you're introducing this whole concept, you're sort of thinking, oh, where do I start? Where are the gaps? That sort of thing. And you were able to have a look and work on those gaps and close them.
And the visual sort of jigsaw thing has been so useful. I've used it so many times in presentations and stuff. So I think it's a really good thing just to kind of preface talks to say, you know, hey, we're actually basing this on something. Useful.
Yep. No, that's great. Thank you for that.
And we've got quite a few comments in the chat about how useful the framework has been.
Oh, good.
And Kat Kane has reminded us that this virtual festival was actually mapped to the framework, so that we've got a robust, practical event offering. So, so yes, we'll save the chat file and we'll be able to send that out to people as well.
Yeah, that's great. So, and that's the other thing about this too. It's, you know, it's sort of linking practice and frameworks and connecting all that sort of stuff, which is all good. Thank you.
Oh, thanks, Fiona. Okay, so we now have a series of lightning talks from some of our Digidex champions. So to start us off, we've got Kat and Kelly and Karen. They're from our resource sharing working group, and they're going to just share some information about a copyright guidelines document that they've created, approaching call about endorsement for a Creative Commons license, and setting up the OER Commons. So please take it away, Karen, Kat and Kelly.
Thanks. Hi, so Kat, Kelly and myself are really pleased to be representing the resource sharing group in this session, highlighting some of the work that we've done. Before we start, I would like to make an acknowledgement to country on behalf of the 3 presenters. So we'd like to pay our respects to the elders past, present and emerging of the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation, the Wadawurrung people of the Kulin Nation, and the Larrakia people of the Larrakia Nation, on whose lands we're presenting from today. So the resource sharing group formed in 2019, shortly after the community of practice was established, and was focused on enabling the community to share the learning resources they were creating. And this approach was a direct response to Call's position on digital dexterity. And it was something that the Digidex community had identified for themselves as a worthwhile goal. Many of us are creating learning content in our organisations, and a lot of it is very similar, but just branded differently. Wouldn't it be nice if we didn't have to reinvent the wheel every time and be able to access created resources that we can tweak and customise, as well as being able to contribute to that pool of shared resources ourselves? Three of us are presenting today, and I'd also like to acknowledge Wendy Ratcliffe, who gave input into the presentation as well. We represent a diverse group of about 15 people from various organisations across Australia and New Zealand. I'm going to be talking about one of our first projects, which was producing a licensing guidelines document. Kat will then speak about the advocacy work that we did, and Kelly will finish off by talking about our presence in OER Commons repository. So in order to be able to share our learning resources, we need to license them in such a way that they can be easily shared. And for the majority of resources, Creative Commons licensing is the most suitable. But to help with this, we felt that a guidelines document would be useful. As anyone who's had anything to do with copyright and licensing will know, it's not as straightforward as it might seem. And there are actually a lot of things to take into consideration. Most of us in the group didn't have a very comprehensive understanding of copyright or Creative Commons, and we quickly realised that we needed some expertise to help us navigate the minefield. We reached out to Amanda Ballinger, who is the copyright advisor for Curtin Library. Amanda has been an ardent advocate for Creative Commons licensing at Curtin Library, and I knew that she was intending to write some guidelines for Curtin. So I didn't have to work too hard to persuade her to write them for a wider audience, which she did, and we're very appreciative. We then invited other copyright experts in libraries in Australia and New Zealand, well, not just libraries, universities, through the contacts in our working group to comment on Amanda's draft. And we're really grateful that they took the time to carefully go through the document and provide some really useful suggestions. Amanda then incorporated that feedback and we finalised the document. So what's in the document? Well, I've just put up here the main headings that you'll find in there. They're around considerations when using Creative Commons licenses. So it covers things like, can your content be licensed for reuse? What kind of license should be applied? How do I apply the license? And some other considerations for reuse. And for the real diehards, there is a couple of pages of copyright and Creative Commons license information at the end. The document, I've uploaded it to OER Commons. I left it a little bit late, so there's a bit of a pending process, but I think it'll be available later today. It's under a Creative Commons license, of course. Feel free to download it and use it. We'd love to hear any comments about it. I think Sarah's also going to post a link. We've popped it in Google Drive, so if you want to have a look at it immediately, you can. And we're also going to be creating an infographic which will present the information in an easy to digest way. So keep an eye out for that in the near future. So just to close off my part, I think we've all learned a ton about copyright. I can verify the usefulness of the guidelines because I applied them recently to license the Curtin 23 Things program. The way that it came together, I think, is really testament to how a community of practice can work well to produce a worthwhile outcome. It was, and it still is, a process of us learning new knowledge together as a group, tapping into the expertise that exists in the wider community and forging some really valuable connections. However, it's one thing to have the guidelines and the know-how. It's another thing again to have the backup of the institutions under which we create them. So now I'm going to hand over to Kat, who will talk about how we approached this aspect.
In 2018, COOL's Digital Dexterity Program began exploring this community of practice model to foster digital capability for staff. And from that moment, there's been 3 intentions or call to actions that have shaped that model. They've been to encourage collaboration and the exchange of knowledge, to support collective learning, but also to ground digital dexterity in real world practice. So the licensing guidelines are a fantastic asset for the DigiDex community to use and our broader organisations. And we believe this development supports informed choices about sharing and reusing materials to benefit our community and industry. And in sharing with you the Licensing Guidelines project, Karen has really foregrounded the practice-based community learning and the collaborative experience that is part of the Digital Dexterity Champions work. But while the story of this particular project demonstrates how sector-wide collaboration, knowledge sharing and learning can typically occur within the community of practice, what we haven't covered is this real world practice. How do we put these guidelines into action? Because often there is a strong will to share or collaborate within an industry, but you still need to find a path to operationalise. And feedback from different champions and community members made it clear that a barrier to applying these licensing guidelines and to sharing resources, this barrier was uncertainty, specifically a discomfort around how our respective institutions would respond to us sharing what is essentially intellectual property. We realised we needed a way to move to a connected agreement across the COOL and CONSL member libraries, so that for this community of practice members to have the agency to contribute intellectual property to this broader group, we needed to advocate for a resource sharing accord to be endorsed by university librarians at each of our institutions. Helpfully, the DigiDex community itself has emerged from what was originally a COOL project. And there was an attendance statement that COOL will take a proactive approach towards digital dexterity and look to facilitate the ability for COOL members to advocate within the profession and across their institutions. So we knew where we could start from. An advocacy approach was going to be crafted. Now, what does this look like? We reached out to an original COOL DigiDex project lead, which is Fiona Salisbury, and we asked for her advice, and she suggested that a really good place to start would be to write a letter to all Australian and New Zealand university librarians via COOL and CONSL, and that this letter proposed a joint approach that would allow institutional material to be shared across our groups under a CC licence. The letter, which advocated for a CC by SA licence, was tabled by Fiona at a May 2020 COOL board meeting on behalf of our champions. The suggestion came back, as these things often do, that we needed a little bit more detail and that we needed to create an advocacy proposal that covered the who, the what, the why and the how. Really clear statements around the value to individual organisations, the really why share our resources kind of rationale. And how do we intend to use these resources and how would we share them and all these things. So what we had to do was put together a cross-institutional resource sharing and CC licensing practice proposal, which is a big mouthful, but it was delivered to the board, tabled at a 2020 COOL meeting, again by Fiona, and our thanks to her for that. What was the outcome of tabling this large titled but very important document to us? Well, happy days. The board endorsed the CC licence proposal. They then went about creating a communication to our university librarians. So in early November 2020, an email from the COOL chair, Jill Benn, was sent to COOL member university librarians. And this email was shaped as a call to action, part of which you're seeing on your screens right now. While we're mindful that institutional IP policies will still be in play and that take up of the proposal is optional, we're still feeling very buoyant about moving forward into an open resource sharing future. And for that future to happen, we need a space and a way to see and share resources, which leads us into the next part of this story. And I'll hand over to Kelly to explain how OER Commons platform is filling that void. Thanks, Kat.
Thanks, Kat and Karen. It's a pleasure and privilege to be here today on behalf of the group. When our group first formed, we did already have a repository to store and share resources within the Champions group. So our first task was really to organise that space, to set up the filing hierarchy within CloudStore. where AARNet had very kindly donated us some space. This was soon achieved with the accompanying usage guidelines produced, but it became apparent that the sharing space was not being overly used. So we explored the possibility of AARNet creating a discovery layer that would make it easier for Digidex champions to navigate the system. And this led us to developing a proposal which really helped to clarify what our requirements are for such a platform, and also to start looking at platforms that were already available to us. So we asked ourselves, what features do we really need in a resource sharing platform, and what was the most important thing? One of the most important things that the community of practice decided was that the platform was open, that you wouldn't need a login to browse or download the resources, and it would then be accessible to anyone and not just the champions group. In fact, we had a long list of desired features, and I'm going to show you what a few of those are by jumping over to OER Commons so that you can see them in action. Because yes, it was OER Commons that came out on top, and it seemed to fit all of our requirements and more. So I'll just jump over here. So here we are on the platform here. I hope you can all see that. And we're using this platform as a bit of a trial period, which we'll review by the end of the year, which may become one of the final tasks of this working group. But we were, as the name suggests, we were looking, this platform is all about providing open educational resources for educators to reuse or to adapt and reuse. So we required a multifaceted search facility. And here you can search by keyword, which includes tags and authors, and also by level or subject. One way to find the resources, it's just a little bit slow. One way to find all the resources that have been added by the community of practice is to search by using the tag, the MyDigiDex tag, which you may have noticed on our slides already. And then you should, that brings all of the items that have been added by the community of practice, because we recommended that we do add that tag as well. So many of you may already be aware of OER Commons, but what I'd also like to show you today is another way of searching, or the way that we've grouped things together. And that's because we have created a group called Digital Dexterity Educators. And you can see that here because I have logged in, but anyone can join that group, but you do need to sign up and create that account, which is very simple. But if you do need to do that to be a member of a group and to upload or add a resource. To find that, you can just go to groups and search there for our name, the Digital Dexterity Educators, search in the search box there. Or I believe you might be getting a handy link popped into the chat box. Okay, so we set up this group, the Digital Dexterity Educators, late last year. So it's still in its infancy, but we have got a few things added already here. As you can see, we've got some modules from QUT, the AIRS and the Study Smart, which was very handy for me, I must say. I'll just click that one open. I've got a little bit of time. My server's a little bit slow to show you. But it was very handy for me at the time because I was developing an interactive a module for our master's students here at CDU, and I just wanted something new, some new ideas, some activities already structured and ready to go. So thanks QUT, you really saved me a lot of time there. And one of the things I want to show you on here too is another feature that we definitely wanted to have in a platform, which is the licensing down here, that easy way to add your license there. I'll just jump back again. And you can see in our list here, we've got the Fab 23 things for digital knowledge. I'm just going to open that up and to show you another feature that we were really keen on, which is the analytics. So we can see the stats here straight up. We can see how useful people are finding this resource. It's been saved 10 times and viewed 90 times, and that is growing daily. Each time I go and check that out, there's always more views there. So people are really finding that useful. The platform is set up to be really interactive, which we also really appreciated. You can leave your comments here on our resource. You can evaluate it against certain standards. The Digidex framework is not there currently, but we'll be working on that to persuade them to add some Australian standards there. And back in our group, we can also start some discussion. Oops, I actually haven't, I'll go back to our group. And there's a facility here, discussions, where we can start a thread and start comparing notes and things, perhaps the way we've used those resources as well. So we did really like that interactive ability. The other thing was a clear path, an easy way to upload, and you can do that really simply by within the group, clicking contribute to the group, submitting from the web or using the open author within OER Commons, or using this button outside the group or anywhere just to add your OER. So it was a very simple way to do that. Just checking to see if there's anything else I wanted to point out to you. I think that was pretty much it, knowing that we've got limited time here, but please do go ahead and explore the site and add yourself as a member. You certainly don't need to be part of the members group to do that. And I think you'll be joining what I think is one of the first Australian groups on OER Commons. And I'll leave it there in case anyone wants to ask a question. But that is more or less the working group in a nutshell. So thanks very much for your attention today.
Thanks, Kelly, Kat, and Karen. All your hard work shows. It is just amazing the work that we've been able to accomplish in such short time. And it's all nicely laid out for us. Are there any questions for Karen, Kat, or Kelly? Just monitoring, and Sarah Howard has mentioned how easy it is to add resources to the OER Commons, and she highly recommends it, and so do I. I've had a look at it. Kelly took us through it when she introduced it to us, and we voted for it, and it is very easy, and it's a great platform to use. If there aren't any other questions right now, I might pass it over to you, Emily, to tell us about how to organize the Champions Group and the Community of Practice.
Hi, everybody. It's lovely to see you all here. I'm Emily Pyers. I'm on the governance group with Gina Sepsovich, Marisa King, the beautiful Ruth Cameron, who's doing my slides today, Wendy Ratcliffe, and of course, Sarah Davidson as well, who supports so much of what we do in this group. Before I go any further, could you just change the slide, Ruth? Yep. So I would like to pay my respects today to the Wathaurong people, who are the traditional custodians of this beautiful land on which I am currently sitting here in Blackwood, which is close to Ballarat. And I'd also like to extend my respect to any Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander people who might be here today as well. Moving on. So yeah, I mentioned we are the governance group. We were quite, we're a bit younger than some of the other groups. We were established only in April last year, not long after we had our Vala satellite event, which some of you might have attended. And if you had, you might remember that there was a really excellent presentation given at that event by Kristen Walker-Pedersen from UTAS, who was able to speak about her research into communities of practice and how they function. And I think that was a really beneficial and informative presentation for a lot of us in the Digidex community of practice, as we were still sort of really finding our feet as a group at that particular point in time. And we realised from conversations after that event that a lot of us weren't really particularly clear on what the outcomes for the Digidex community of practice were. And so we decided to establish the governance group to work on establishing some basic frameworks and expectations for the wider community of practice, and just outline that collective purpose so that we all could feel a sense of confidence in what our contribution should be, and so that new people coming into the group would also sort of understand what the expectations were and what we were trying to achieve. There was another quite significant driver at the time, which is that, as Fiona mentioned, we've been really, really well supported by CUL and Cavall through our establishment phase. But we were quite aware that that wouldn't necessarily be a permanent kind of arrangement. Obviously, there's a cost in the level of support, having the administrative support that we've had to date from Cavall. And so we wanted to make sure that we had things in place so that we were able to quite strongly advocate for our own continued existence, and so that we could, you know, really effectively advocate for ourselves, and also so that we could move to what a slightly more self-reliant model of governance and activity, which we have now, which is fantastic. Although, of course, we do still get a lot of support from Zara, which is wonderful. Next slide, thanks, Ruth. So what we've gotten done since April last year, well, we'd worked on developing scope and purpose templates that could be filled out for the wider community of practice, so we could clarify our sort of really broad top-level objectives. And that you can see were also completed by all the working groups as well. So that, and they're quite brief documents, they really just are comprised of a brief elevator pitch, the membership of the group, and sort of the boundaries of the activities undertaken by that group. We have a pretty fluid community of practice membership, so this really helps. We think this helps people coming into the group to sort of understand what all the different working groups are doing, because there's quite a few of us now. And those have all been quite prominently saved as top tabs in our team environment, so they can be easily found. The other thing that we did was we wrote a formal position description or role description for champions within the community of practice. So champions, as Fiona mentioned, are nominated by their institution, and there's a time allowance and some responsibility for driving Digidex within the organisation. So we wanted to make sure that that was really recognised and made very clear to people coming into the group, so that they, again, understood their expectations, but also to give them that little bit of authority within their own institutions to undertake new initiatives and to advocate for digital dexterity. We worked on delivering some more consistent branding and a library of brand assets to create visual consistency for the community of practice. So you might have noticed that we all have the same slides and they all have the white digital dexterity logo on the dark blue background. And that's just to help sort of with visual recognition for the group and to sort of build a little bit of authority. And we also created a communications template that could be used to identify audiences and objectives for group communications. And that helps us not just with keeping consistency of tone and awareness of our audiences in our communications, but it's also really useful as record keeping around what we're trying to achieve with our different communications and activities, such as, you know, these presentations today. No, Ruth, it's good. Next one. Yep, next steps. Bedding it all down. We've written it all, most of it is in use, but we want to make sure people are using it really consistently and they understand what it's all there for, and that we have, you know, the wider group support for all of this. administrative documentation. We want to clarify our communications. Obviously, we don't want to limit our communications to just the community of practice members and the champions. We want to take it as widely as we can. So thinking about how we can use our comms channels to do that most effectively will be something the governance group is hoping to look at this year. And also looking at how we structure the community of practice meetings so that community of practice members are getting the support and the knowledge that they need to carry on their own digital dexterity practice within their own organisation. Thank you. Any questions?
I think you've stunned everyone, Emily. That was wonderful. It's really great.
Thank you, Ruth.
Sorry, no tone of surprise there. I should just mention that Emily was one of the driving forces behind the beautiful branding that we have. So she and Sarah and a lot of other people have worked really hard on our branding. So kudos to you.
Thanks, Ruth.
Okay, if you do have any questions that you can't think of at the moment, but you might think of later, just pop them into chat and we can look at those at the end of the presentations. Our next presenter is Anna Shah Hosseini from the University of Technology, Sydney, and she is going to talk about What About a Blog. She's a member of the DigiDex Engagement Working Group. So take it away, Anna.
So I guess to get started, what I quickly want to do is in the chat, I'm actually going to put the link for this blog because it went live today. And so I'm just going to put it in there so everyone can check it out. And then I'll get started. Okay. Can you guys see it in presenter view or?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let me try and fix that up. Right. Don't know if that's working. Sorry, just one sec.
Anna, if it's easier, I can share my screen.
Yes, maybe that's better.
Okay, just a second.
Thanks, Ruth.
Okay, how's that?
Perfect, thank you. So I'm part of the engagement group from within the Digital Dexterity Champions, and my peers in this group are Ruth Cameron, Emily Pyers, Simone Terrell, Sarah Davidson, Danielle Kong, Christy Newton, Lynn Torres, and Christopher Hart. And I'm sorry if I pronounced anyone's name incorrectly. I'm from UTS, as Ruth mentioned, and I work in the Information Services Department. I'm part of the Digital Dexterity Champions group. And before I actually get into the presentation, I would like to do an acknowledgement. Next slide, please. Ruth. Acknowledgement of country. So I'm on campus today in Sydney at UTS. So I'd like to acknowledge the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, upon whose ancestral lands our city campus stands. I'd like to pay my respect to elders, both past, present and emerging, acknowledging them as the traditional custodians of knowledge for this land. Next slide, please, Ruth. Thank you. So who are we? Who is the engagement team? We are a bunch of enthusiastic library professionals. We're obviously part of the CALL and the Council of New Zealand University Libraries Digital Dexterity Community of Practice. And our aim or our purpose is to promote or let everyone know about all the activities going on within the Champions group. So next slide, please. Thank you. So why a blog? Why did we decide to do a blog? So for us, this was a learning by doing approach. It really requires us to practice what we preach. And as digital dexterity enthusiasts and champions, we often refer to the digital dexterity framework for students and library professionals as a tool for embedding skills in students and staff. And actually creating this blog and maintaining it will build our skills in different areas of the framework, like ICT, problem solving, collaboration, and a few other areas as well. And we're learning a lot from each other. So, and I think for me, this is the thing I enjoy most about the engagement group, is learning from other librarians from different universities and hearing about their ideas and their experiences. The blog is really somewhere we can also capture the digital dexterity community of practice. So if you have, for example, like a colleague who's not part of the Champions group and they ask you, well, what do you guys discuss or what's it all about? We can just send them that blog as well and give them a starting point to sort of delve into digital dexterity. Can I have the next slide, please, Ruth? Thank you. So a little bit more about the blog. So we are planning on posting monthly. And as I mentioned before, it went live today, yay. We're hoping to post monthly, but we do have a growth mindset around this. So we will adjust as needed. So depending on, number of blog posts we actually get that are, how much interest there is, number of blog posts that actually go through, number of interactions we have with the blog, that sort of thing. But we do have some exciting blogs, blog posts coming up, I should say. We've got one on OERs. We've got one on the Curtin University's 23 Things program, which is, I think, a wonderful way to embed digital literacy in students. And we've also got some special guest posts coming up from the GLAM sector and other areas of the industry as well. So if you would like to get involved, please check out the blog. I've put the link into the chat, and Emily and Ruth have done a wonderful introduction blog post for the blog as well, which I recommend everyone check out. Happy to take any questions as well.
Thank you, Anna. And congratulations on the blog post starting today. It'll be interesting to see all the different, what you've added and all the different things everyone else has to say, not just the Champions group. Does anybody have any questions for Anna? You might want to think about that as well. We have time for a 5-minute break. So I'm just going to say I've got 43. to whichever hour from wherever you are. So if we meet back at 50, so for me, that's 1:50, 12:50. For most of the people, it's 1:50, but I'll see you all back at 50 and we'll take a short pause. Now I'm going to introduce both from Victoria University, Beck Muir and Amika. You're going to talk about DigiChat. I will pass it on to you and you can tell us all about it.
Hello, everyone. My name is Beck. I'm just perfect. Thank you, Amika. We've got the screen sorted out. Wonderful. So I'm just going to get my slides sorted as well. And so firstly, hello, everyone, and thank you for listening to our presentation. My name is Beck Muir, the Manager, Libraries West with Victoria University. And with me today is Amika, Library Officer, also with VU. So we'll just go on to the next slide. Thank you. So Victoria University acknowledges, recognises and respects the ancestors, elders and families of the Boonwurrung, Wadawurrung and Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, who are the traditional owners of the university land in Victoria, and the Gadigal and Gurungai of the Eora Nation, who are the traditional owners of university land in Sydney. So our presentation today is talking about learning new software through new software. As we all know, COVID-19 gave us no introduction period. For us to work, we all had to suddenly be online. For us to be online, we all had to know how it worked. This was a time of instability where staff had to get accustomed to setting up their homes to also function as their workplaces. As we championed new ways of working, managers at VU were aware that we didn't have all the answers about how to use something or how to do something or what to download. However, tough cheddar. We needed to have the answers and we needed to have the skills so that our teams could have the knowledge and the skills that they needed to make this transition. So in this strange environment, DigiChat stepped forward. It was designed deliberately as a paradox program, one that provided training in the same software, services, and programs that our team were using while we were actively using them. Through online presentations, we aim to deliver consistent and high-quality internal training that utilised new software while learning and teaching in that software. Through interactive activities, guided learning and peer feedback, these sessions provided a way for our frontline library team to gain new skills or to refresh current ones, share knowledge and to troubleshoot any questions or suggestions that they might have had in this new environment. So our next slide, perfect. So we needed to address these elements, learning new software while working in that new software. To do this, we had to understand who we were actually designing for. When designing any type of staff training, the first thing to think about is who's at the centre. Who are we working with? Who are we working for? Who are we actually designing this suite for? Our staff were frontline staff, so face-to-face communication was the norm. We were predominantly older staff and generally aged over 45. Some of our staff didn't have internet at home or didn't have a device to use. So we were in a situation where VU Library lent out laptops and dongles, but this also meant that we were then having to think about how do we present this online training? How will people be viewing us? People weren't viewing us on large monitors, they were viewing us on a small laptop screen. So our next slide. Perfect. So the second part of learning design is finding a way of embedding learning into practice and discovery, and I'm going to be honest here, also fun. If you're not enjoying what you're learning, it's so quick to forget it and you don't get involved, you don't want to commit to it because it's quite frankly a bit of a bore. So we didn't want that to be the fate of DigiChat. So to start off with, we picked Zoom. Zoom is a true collaboration platform that induces an element of a team environment and team building, which is often the missing element when you're talking about a work from home experience. So managers introduced Zoom to team members through formal, regular meetings, but we also reinforced that Zoom was all about collaboration. So this started a process of leveling the playing field, and by verbalizing that management was okay with using the tech in non-work ways, it suddenly made this paradox more workable. Technology changed from something that happened to people to something that happened with people that we could use and enjoy and have fun. Staff were learning about Zoom while using Zoom, and we recognized this paradox. Through team meetings, the informal catch-ups and general chats, we introduced the elements behind a Zoom that made it collaborative. So this included things like video filters and screen sharing. So we worked together to discover how to create meetings, how to use breakout rooms, and how to create profile pictures. We also looked at things like Bitmojis, how we demonstrated who we were through this platform in a way that was engaging. The foundations of our online training program emerged from this environment, where staff were feeling more empowered to discover independently and as a team. And our next slide. Perfect. So from this environment of I can do this, we transitioned into the full DigiChat suite. So DigiChat is a combined word, obviously, reflecting both digital and our service at that time, which was the online one, which was LibChat. So DigiChat and Zoom taught us that frontline staff had an appetite for exploring new technologies, and they would also independently take steps to learn this. These factors now combined, so we had independent discovery married with scaffolded learning through DigiChat, married with fun practicality from looking at technology as something we could do, married with an understanding of who our audience were and how they were engaging with us. This paradox of online learning, using new technology for our jobs while actively learning it, was balanced with these elements and now became workable. So DigiChat started life as a digital-based learning framework, transitioning through not only digital dexterity and digital literacy and discoverability, but through to embedding this into the daily practice of our work from home lives. Each session was built deliberately on 2 levels, both as a refresher and as an introduction. Content was very strictly managed, meaning that each deliverer had to address these 2 needs in every sessions. Sessions followed a predictable format for staff, and this was one of the keys to the success because it increased buy-in into the program. As a practical program, DigiChat was designed to provide training in a flexible manner, allowing staff to learn, play, experience, and discover at the same time as actively applying what they learned into their workplace. Its very first session was a basic introduction to Teams, and by using this familiar platform of Zoom, we had engagement into an entirely new software. Also, by providing the digital training in this way and by providing it as a foundation into practicality, this reduced the fatigue and stress associated with the move to work from home and introduced training in a way that was engaging, co-designed and exciting. The predictable and familiar pattern with DigiChat, which continued throughout the entire suite, meant that it soon provided a touchstone in a time of uncertainty, transitioning to a stabilizing focus point while working from home. So DigiChat was cyclic. It was delivered in 3 phases: customer service, technology skills, and professional development. The suite transitioned staff from an initial understanding of who is the customer through to how do I use and build upon my knowledge to who am I as a professional. The questions you see on screen are the scaffolding that formed each of these phases. Each session in each phase reflected back onto these questions, but they did so from a multiple of different angles. This meant that staff interrogated the sessions from different approaches and from their own individual lens. And as such, each staff member found a perspective on each session that worked for them and supported what they needed for their professional development. Walking the digital dexterity pathway, DigiChat enabled us to interrogate who we were. In transitioning through these phases, the scaffolded design meant that every session had its place. A consequence of this was that there was limited or no flexibility to change the run order of DigiChat. However, as each session built on the last, the benefits outweighed the cost. As an empowerment framework, it was supported by a multi-page overview and strategic proposal, which meant that while DigiChat was delivered in a linear manner, its foundation in learning design meant that the staff member and every staff member, because of those multiple approaches, was at the centre. Once the program was completed, and even while being completed, staff were able to jump in and out as required and to interrogate each individual session on the level that they needed. This two-tier design meant that staff could engage with topics and bring out new content every single time they touched base on it. This all increased the lifespan of the Learning Suite. So learning theory provided a groundwork foundation for the program. Lengths of the sessions were set at between 30 minutes to an hour, as that's how long people can generally concentrate on a screen, particularly bearing in mind the laptop screens generally used. All presentations and sessions were either centrally managed or centrally reviewed. So this meant that a small panel decided on the nature of the sessions, the scaffolding, and what would be covered, or if the session was run by one of our staff or by an outsider, would review the session prior to delivery to provide feedback. So this transitioned to a seamless message for our attendees, and also provided a consistency in the training, which translated again to comfort and familiarity with the program, and in turn increased staff buy-in. So the skills-based design meant that each session was reinforced in some manner, whether by what we called a learning kit or by engagement activities. We also embedded in things like peer mentoring and buddying and co-creation of projects and reports, and we're thrilled to discover as well that our team members were independently forming buddying groups as well. So this embedded digital learning into a framework of continuous growth, meaning that sessions were repeatable, engaging on different levels, and quite frankly, interesting. Lastly, we sought feedback not only at the end of each phase, but at the end of every single session. We didn't just seek this feedback though, we actioned it immediately. So we reviewed the feedback immediately after the session ended and made changes to the next session in view of this feedback. So this meant that staff could actively see their feedback changing things as they went, which increased the feeling of ownership over the program. This changed everything from how we presented to be more inclusive, through to the use of a darker and larger mouse pointer for viewability, through to the pace that we presented at, what we covered, and how we even shared our screens and engaged. But of course, the most important thing about any training program is what we get out of it. So I'm now going to move over to Emeka to discuss the outcomes of DigiChat.
Thanks, Beck. So in discussions had for this presentation with Beck and other facilitators of DigiChat, we broke down the outcomes into 4 areas. So staff engagement. So due to lockdown and staff working from home, DigiChat had a captive audience, resulting in a high level of attendance to events. Library staff provided valuable feedback at the end of each session, and this feedback guided library managers into shaping these future sessions. And yeah, as Beck mentioned, made campus library staff feel that they were an essential part of the development of DigiChat. As a result of the staff feedback, DigiChat sessions expanded from covering more than just essential training and explored further skills that staff could apply to library services. Furthermore, staff were independently exploring new technology and would bring this information to the rest of the library. Staff have taught each other how to use programs such as Bitmoji, Canva, Twitter, and TikTok. DigiChat sessions had also a variety of engagement within each session. Staff could interact with the same programs as presenters, could answer questions to quizzes, participate in polls, and much more. Staff empowerment. DigiChat created a space where staff felt safe. Managers who facilitated sessions would make an effort to emphasize that everyone was welcome in the DigiChat space. Staff could turn off their cameras and were encouraged to ask questions throughout the presentations. DigiChat was a new experience for everyone, Many glitches occurred with presenters, and the whole DigiChat group would work together to solve these issues. This made everyone who presented feel more at ease, and they could make mistakes and would not be judged for them. As a result of DigiChat, most, if not all, campus library staff presented either on DigiChat or other library events held in 2020. DigiChat gave campus library staff a sense of togetherness, as staff had previously been spread over 7 campuses throughout Melbourne. DigiChat provided a space for staff to engage with colleagues that they might have worked with for many years, but have never actually met. Discovery of staff hidden knowledge. So managers discovered that staff displayed a high level of emotional intelligence through their encouragement and support to library staff who presented. Throughout DigiChat, campus library managers uncovered knowledge and skills within the campus library team. DigiChat sessions later in 2020 had a variety of presentations around Microsoft softwares, artificial intelligence, mindfulness, digital citizenship, and library values. The last DigiChat session consisted of 5 5-minute presentations, ranging from QR codes to introduction to building your own computer, to philosophy, to Lego design. Several projects are now running at Victoria University Library that came about through the DigiChat program, such as updating our library FAQs, implementing tagging into the library chat service, looking into chatbots, and establishing a library social media presence. Staff proactive in professional development. So DigiChat appeared in the right place in the right time, as staff were stuck at home working and attending a lot of online meetings. DigiChat provided staff with an opportunity to have a break from their usual work duties and to learn about something new. DigiChat was different to other forms of professional development, which would normally involve attending presentations as a group or completing individual training modules. The difference with DigiChat was that it brought all staff together and promoted discussion on how the information presented could be utilised by the library service. As DigiChat was an internally run training program within the library, it meant that the terminology and structure of trainings could be customised for the target audience of campus library staff. This customisation meant that staff felt that they were a part of the presentations and didn't feel that they were being spoken down to with jargon. So lessons learned from DigiChat was that DigiChat made managers realise that library documentation didn't have to be just static text. The first DigiChat sessions involved staff participating in creating a new customer service charter for working remotely. Staff collaborated on PowerPoint slides over Zoom, discussing what needed to change and stay the same from the previous customer service charter. Recording these sessions as well meant that staff had a repository of information that they could revisit. This program has shown VU Library that internal training is not a burden, but an opportunity that allows for customization. The cost of running internal training, such as staff time, is balanced by opportunities to embed new workplace practices, offer feedback, discover hidden skills, all within a safe environment. The default reaction is to think we don't have that experience or expertise, whereas programs like DigiChat show that we do, but we don't necessarily know that. DigiChat also highlighted when we really don't have that experience or expertise in certain areas, but why not let your inquisitive staff gain that experience and expertise and present it back to the whole library? So what's next for DigiChat and VU? So from the feedback given from 2020, DigiChat will continue into 2021. There will be greater analysis of staff feedback to help create content for 2021. And library managers and facilitators are building a hybrid model with realistic and ongoing opportunities for more engagement. Some final takeaways. So this quote at the top was from a library staff member in a recent discussion that said in 2020, they learned more than they had in the past 25 years of working at Victoria University Library. So the power that came from DigiChat was the realization that libraries need to provide a space for staff to discover and explore things, and then encourage those staff to bring back what they find out to the rest of the library. And then using new software to learn about new software library managers came to realise and capitalise on their staff's abilities to explore a new software such as Zoom by themselves.
That was wonderful, Beck and Mika. Thank you so much. We have had quite a few comments in chat, and I know Beck has answered some of the questions, including one from Frank Ponti asking if we were going to, if DigiChat was going to broaden post-COVID, and Beck has said that yes, the team and the framework is currently being developed for the next iteration. And we've got lots and lots of comments saying it's such a fantastic program. It was a thoughtful, well-planned approach, and it included learning, teaching, empowerment and community. And I think that summed it up for all of us, really. Now, thank you everyone for your presentations. We now have a Q&A session. I would like to just go back to a couple of questions that we had on the blog. Anna, if you're still there, do you mind answering some blog questions?
Absolutely.
Awesome. Okay, so the first question, which we asked just before the break, was whether the blog was going to be mainly text or will it be in a mixed format?
We do have a template. So if anyone is interested in contributing to the blog, they will receive a template, which I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, Ruth, but it's a 600-word template. But, you know, images are, I think, always great. And I would just say that if someone has a particular idea of how they want it to look, I mean, we're always open for discussion as well. So I would never say, you know, outright no to anything.
Exactly. We're all about flexibility. And the other question was, how are we going to send alerts about our new blog posts? I don't know that we've actually discussed this in our engagement group.
Yes. Great question. And we will get back to everyone about this, I think.
I'm not sure if people can actually subscribe to the blog so that they get email notifications. I think that was one of the, it's a WordPress platform, so I think they can do that.
I think we should send an email out about that.
Okay, watch this space, everybody.
Yeah, that's right. Watch this space.
Oh, here we go. Frank, again, is it worth considering a subscribe option so that people are notified when new posts are available? So yes, we'll definitely investigate that, Frank.
Yes, yeah.
Oh, and Emily's just jumped in. We're investigating our options for a subscribe option. Great. Did anyone have any questions? What I will do, I'll just put in the chat the link to our poll, which we would love you to contribute to. It's just so that we can get, as Beck was mentioning, you know, the dynamic feedback so that we can tailor our presentations in the virtual festival for you all. And also for our next virtual festival, if there is one, we'll be able to incorporate feedback as well. Does anyone have any questions? We might actually be able to give ourselves a slight early mark here. I just wanted to say thank you all to our presenters and to all of you participants who have come along as well. It was fantastic attendance. I think at one stage we had 138 people listening in, so thank you very much. It was great to hear from Fiona, just setting the stage for the Digital Dexterity Framework and the Champions Group and the Community of Practice. You know, basically, it's all about exciting connections, contributing to CALL strategic programs over the next 2 years, and also supporting all of you, our library community. Our resource sharing working group, just talking about the collaboration, the generosity, the open access that's involved in resource resource sharing, and also emphasising practice-based community learning. You know, congratulations on the Creative Commons endorsement and also the OER Commons platform. Thanks to Emily talking about the governance working group, just providing some clarity, increasing engagement with the community of practice and also the Digidex champions, and the idea of sustainability, you know, so that we can keep ourselves going, because it's a worthwhile program. And thanks to Anna for talking about our blog. And as you say, it's not just engagement, it is our community of practice learning and practicing and increasing our own digital dexterity. And our final presentation, DigiChat, Beck and Amika, that was just amazing. It was just such a rich training program that uncovered all of that hidden talent and fostered ownership at the same time. So just to say thank you to all of our speakers and facilitators today, we've arranged for native trees to be planted on their behalf by a community group, and that's through the organisation 15 Trees. I'd remind you that this session has been recorded. There'll be a wrap-up email approximately 2 weeks after the end of our virtual festival on the 12th of February, and it will contain all of the links and the resources, including the recorded presentations. And we also want to remind you about the next event in this virtual festival, which is tomorrow, Tuesday the 2nd of February. That begins at 12 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time. And tomorrow's session will focus on wellbeing in educational contexts. Our speakers include Adrian Stagg, Susan Carter and Cecily Anderson. They're all from the University of Southern Queensland. They're going to give us a workshop and a presentation on open educational resources. And we would just love to see you all there. Thank you, everyone.